History is not a straight line. It is a crime scene with half the evidence missing, the witnesses dead, and the official report written by whoever survived with the best handwriting. Today, we are looking at 33 hidden gaps in history we still cannot properly explain, from lost armies and unreadable scripts to entire civilizations that left behind ruins, bones, symbols, and one huge historical shrug. 1. The Ubaid lizard people sound like the worst possible archaeology headline, but the real mystery is even better. Before the Sumerians turned southern Mesopotamia into the world's first paperwork nightmare, the Ubaid culture was already building villages, temples, irrigation systems, and strange little clay figures with long heads, almond eyes, and faces that look suspiciously reptilian. Were they gods? Ancestors? Ritual dolls? A Bronze Age baby monitor from the uncanny valley? Nobody knows. The wildest part is that these people were not some cartoon pre-civilization grunting near a mud hut. They were organizing communities before writing existed in that region, which means they left us the historical equivalent of a creepy photo album with every caption deleted. We can hold their statues, stare into their tiny alien faces, and still not know what they meant. 2. The 3rd century crisis is what happens when an empire becomes so chaotic that even the historians seem to throw their hands up and say, "Absolutely not. I am taking a mental health century." From about the year 235 to 284, Rome had assassinations, civil wars, breakaway empires, invasions, plagues, economic collapse, and emperors who sometimes lasted about as long as a discount candle. Some ruled for months. Some were declared emperor by one army, murdered by another, and then replaced by a man whose main qualification was standing nearby with ambition. The records become patchy, biased, confused, and often written much later. So we know Rome nearly fell apart, but many details are lost in the smoke. It is not a clean timeline. It is a historical bar fight with coins, corpses, and several men named Marcus claiming they are totally in charge now. 3. The Tarim mummies are the kind of discovery that makes history teachers quietly close the textbook and whisper, "Okay, we need a bigger map." In the dry deserts of western China, archaeologists found ancient mummies with light hair, long noses, and beautifully woven clothes, including patterns that look a lot like tartan. No, this does not mean a lost Scottish pipe band got terribly confused in the Bronze Age. But it does mean the Tarim Basin was connected to a much stranger and wider prehistoric world than people once imagined. These mummies are thousands of years old, and their clothing, genetics, and burial customs suggest complex movement across Eurasia long before famous Silk Road caravans. We know they lived there. We know they dressed with style. What we do not fully know is how their world worked, what they called themselves, and how many forgotten cultures met in that desert. 4. The Voynich manuscript is a book that has been annoying brilliant people for over a century, which is honestly one of its greatest achievements. It is filled with unknown writing, strange circular diagrams, bathing women, mysterious stars, and plants that look like a medieval gardener got hit on the head and invented botany from nightmares. Cryptographers, linguists, historians, computer scientists, and hobby detectives have all tried to crack it. So far, the manuscript has responded with the ancient scholarly equivalent of "nice try, nerd." It may be a coded text, a constructed language, a medical manual, an elaborate hoax, or something else entirely. The problem is not that the book is empty nonsense. It is organized enough to look meaningful. That is the maddening part. Someone spent serious time making this thing, and we still cannot tell whether it is genius, madness, or the most patient prank in history. 5. Genghis Khan conquered so much of the world that maps started sweating, but his burial place remains one of history's greatest locked doors. According to later traditions, his funeral was surrounded by secrecy, and the people connected to the burial may have been killed to protect the location. Some stories go even harder, claiming horses trampled the ground, rivers were diverted, and everyone involved vanished into silence. Are all of those details proven? No. But the result is very real. We still do not know where the founder of the Mongol Empire was buried. Mongolia is full of sacred landscapes, and many researchers are careful because this is not just a treasure hunt. It is cultural memory, national identity, and archaeology all tangled together. The most powerful conqueror of the medieval world left behind an empire, a bloodline, and one giant "You are not finding me" stamped across the steppe. 6. The Greek Dark Ages are not called dark because everyone forgot where the sun was. They are dark because the records go painfully quiet. After the collapse of the Mycenaean palace world around the end of the Bronze Age, Greece lost many signs of complex administration, long-distance luxury trade shrank, populations shifted, and the old writing system called Linear B disappeared. Imagine an entire region going from palace accountants recording sheep, oil, and bronze to several centuries where writing basically drops out of the room. Then, centuries later, the Greeks adopted a new alphabet from the Phoenicians, and suddenly, literature, law, and epic poetry came roaring back. But that middle stretch is frustratingly blurry. We know people lived, farmed, fought, migrated, worshipped, and rebuilt. We just do not get their own written voices. It is like ancient Greece rebooted after a system crash and the backup file was missing. 7. Nan Madol looks like someone tried to build Venice out of blackstone logs in the middle of the Pacific, then forgot to leave a proper instruction manual. Off the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia, massive basalt columns were stacked into artificial islets, canals, walls, tombs, and ceremonial spaces. Some stones weigh many tons, and the site was built without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals. Local traditions connect Nan Madol with powerful chiefs, sacred authority, and even supernatural builders, which is exactly the kind of thing people say when the engineering looks wildly inconvenient. Archaeologists know it was the seat of the Saudeleur dynasty and later abandoned, but the details of labor, transport, organization, and daily life remain full of gaps. It is not magic in the lazy sense. It is worse for our pride. Humans did it, and we still cannot fully explain how smoothly they pulled it off. 8. The Lost Army of Cambyses is one of those stories where the desert plays the villain and history forgets to provide a receipt. According to Herodotus, the Persian king Cambyses sent a huge force across the Egyptian desert toward the oracle at Siwa. Then a sandstorm supposedly swallowed the army, and 50,000 soldiers vanished. That number may be exaggerated because ancient historians did enjoy turning disasters into blockbuster trailers. But the mystery remains irresistible. If a large Persian expedition really disappeared, where are the weapons, bones, camps, or equipment? Various discoveries have been proposed over the years, but none has closed the case. The Sahara is not a filing cabinet. It moves, buries, erases, and laughs at human confidence. So we are left with a terrifying image, an imperial army marching into yellow emptiness, and the historical record simply stopping like someone cut the sound. 9. Linear A is the ancient world's version of a locked spreadsheet that may contain everything, but the password died 3,000 years ago. The Minoans of Crete used it before the Greeks dominated the island, and we have inscriptions on tablets, seals, vessels, and ritual objects. The cruel joke is that some signs look familiar because a later Greek writing system, Linear B, was deciphered, but Linear A records a different language, and that language still refuses to identify itself at the door. We can see repeated patterns. We can guess some numbers, commodities, and administrative habits. We can tell that somebody was tracking goods, offerings, or taxes, because bureaucracy is apparently older than joy. But the names, prayers, instructions, and meanings remain locked. The Minoans left records of their world, and we are standing outside like unpaid interns staring through frosted glass. 10. Derinkuyu underground city sounds like a fantasy dungeon until you remember people actually lived and hid there. In Cappadocia, Turkey, this underground complex descends many levels into the volcanic rock, with tunnels, rooms, ventilation shafts, wells, storage areas, stables, churches, and massive stone doors that could be rolled shut from the inside. It could shelter thousands of people, possibly during raids, wars, or religious persecution. The maddening part is that the city was expanded over many periods, so asking who first dug it is like asking who first edited a document after 500 people used track changes. Hittites, Phrygians, early Christians, Byzantines, and others all enter the conversation. We know later communities used it brilliantly as a refuge. But the earliest phases are murky. Somewhere in the past, someone looked at the ground and thought, what if home, but downward? 11. Roanoke is the mystery that launched 1,000 dramatic documentaries, and all because one English colony failed to leave a proper note. In the late 16th century, settlers on Roanoke Island in North America were left behind while their governor, John White, returned to England for supplies. War delayed him for years. When he finally came back in 1590, the colony was empty. The word Croatoan had been carved into a post, and crow appeared on a tree. That sounds spooky, but it may not mean supernatural doom. Croatoan referred to a nearby native community, and the colonists may have relocated or integrated with local people. The real gap is that nobody wrote the next chapter clearly enough for us to follow it. No dramatic battlefield, no mass grave, no signed exit form. Just a missing settlement, one carved word, and centuries of people making it much creepier than necessary. 12. Great Zimbabwe is not mysterious because Africans could not have built it. They absolutely did. And the embarrassing mystery is why so many outsiders refuse to accept that obvious fact for so long. The Stone City in southern Africa was the heart of a powerful medieval kingdom connected to gold trade, cattle wealth, and Indian Ocean networks. Its massive walls were built without mortar, which apparently caused colonial writers to panic and start inventing fantasy owners, because racism with a notebook is still racism. Europeans once tried to credit Phoenicians, Arabs, biblical figures, or basically anyone except the local ancestors of the Shona people. Today, the African origin is clear, but gaps remain about the exact political structure, daily life, and reasons for decline. Great Zimbabwe is a monument not just to lost history, but to how prejudice can turn obvious evidence into a ridiculous conspiracy with a hat. 13. Sub-Roman Britain is the foggy stretch where Roman Britain ends, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms rise, and King Arthur wanders in holding a legendary sword and causing historians headaches. After Roman authority faded in the early 5th century, written records became thin, later stories became loud, and archaeology had to do a lot of heavy lifting. Towns changed, trade patterns shifted, local rulers emerged, and communities faced raids, migration, warfare, and political fragmentation. But the details are messy. Was there one great war leader behind the Arthur legends? Maybe. Was there a neat round table with perfect branding? Almost certainly not. The problem is that later medieval writers turned scraps of memory into heroic entertainment, and now we have to separate history from literary fog machines. Somewhere in that gap were real people rebuilding life after empire. Unfortunately, most of them did not leave us clean minutes from the meeting. 14. The Sphinx is already strange enough without giving it an identity crisis, but then comes the argument about its age. The mainstream view places the Great Sphinx of Giza in the Old Kingdom, usually linked to Pharaoh Khafre around the 3rd millennium before Christ. That is the sensible textbook version. Then some researchers point to erosion patterns and argue that heavy rainfall shaped parts of the enclosure, which would suggest a much older monument. Most Egyptologists disagree, and the older dating remains controversial. But the debate reveals a genuine frustration. Even one of the world's most famous monuments has unanswered questions. Who designed it? Why this lion body and human head? How did its meaning change over time? The Sphinx sits there like the oldest security guard on Earth, watching generations argue about it and saying absolutely nothing because apparently stone cats love drama. 15. The Guanches of the Canary Islands are a reminder that isolation does not mean simplicity. Before Spanish conquest, the indigenous people of the islands had their own languages, mummification practices, social structures, cave dwellings, and traditions. Some were described by Europeans as light-skinned or blue-eyed, which later helped fuel all kinds of dramatic speculation. But the more grounded evidence links them to Berber populations from North Africa. That still leaves fascinating questions. How exactly did their ancestors reach the islands? Why did they seem to lose or not maintain seafaring between islands? How did separate island cultures develop so differently? And yes, the Canary Islands also became famous for whistled communication. a practical mountain-to-mountain messaging system that makes texting look emotionally weak. The Guanches were not a random lost tribe from nowhere. They were a real Atlantic people whose early chapters were erased by conquest, distance, and silence. 16. The 9th Spanish Legion is often presented as Rome's elite unit, marching into Scotland and vanishing like the empire's most dramatic ghost story. The truth is more complicated, which is exactly what makes it frustrating. The Legion, Legio Nona Hispana, served in Britain, and then its clear record becomes uncertain in the 2nd century. Older theories suggested it was destroyed north of Hadrian's Wall during fighting with local tribes. Other evidence hints it may have been transferred elsewhere and disappeared later in another conflict. So did 5,000 soldiers get wiped out in the misty north? Maybe not. Did the paperwork trail become suspiciously thin? Absolutely. Rome was obsessed with records, monuments, inscriptions, and bragging about military units, so when a famous legion fades out, people notice. It is less one clean disappearance and more a military career ending in a dark hallway with several locked doors. 17. The Amazonian geoglyphs are what happens when modern technology walks into an old assumption and calmly sets it on fire. For a long time, many outsiders imagined the pre-Columbian Amazon as mostly untouched wilderness, with small scattered groups living lightly under endless trees. Then deforestation and LiDAR surveys revealed earthworks, roads, ditches, settlements, raised fields, and geometric patterns across parts of the basin. Suddenly, the empty jungle story started looking less like science and more like a lazy guess wearing hiking boots. This does not mean the whole Amazon was one giant city. It means many areas were shaped by complex societies before European diseases, conquest, and collapse devastated populations. The gap is enormous because so much was destroyed before it was described properly. The forest looked wild to later observers, but in many places it may have been recovering from a human catastrophe nobody bothered to record with care. 18. Rongorongo is one of the most painful writing mysteries on Earth because it came so close to being understood, and then history slammed the door. On Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, wooden tablets were carved with rows of tiny signs, people, animals, shapes, symbols, all arranged in a distinctive pattern. Some scholars think it may be true writing. Others think it could be mnemonic, ritual, genealogical, or something in between. The disaster is that colonial violence, disease, slave raids, and cultural disruption shattered the chain of knowledge. By the time outsiders seriously tried to understand the script, the people who could explain it were gone or silenced. Today, nobody can read it with certainty. It is not just a puzzle, it is a cultural wound carved into wood. The tablets are there, the signs are there, and the living key was ripped away at exactly the wrong time. 19. Poverty Point in Louisiana is proof that ancient North America was doing huge organized projects while plenty of people still imagine it as a quiet waiting room before Europeans arrived. Around 1700 before Christ, people built massive earthworks, ridges, mounds, plazas, and complex layouts that required planning, labor, and social coordination. The site was connected to long-distance exchange networks, with materials coming from far beyond the local area. And yet we do not know exactly who these builders were, what language they spoke, how their society was organized, or why the site eventually changed and declined. There are no royal inscriptions saying, King Mudboss I built this ridge for spiritual reasons and excellent drainage. Instead, archaeologists read soil, artifacts, hearths, and patterns. Poverty Point was not primitive, it was monumental. The gap is that its builders left architecture louder than their biographies. 20. The Minoans are often described as peaceful, elegant, and advanced, which is historian code for "we found pretty frescoes and not enough answers." On Crete, they built palace complexes, traded widely, used writing systems we still cannot fully read, and filled their art with bulls, sea creatures, rituals, and people who dressed better than most modern airport passengers. Then came disasters, earthquakes, fires, political upheaval, and the huge eruption of Thera nearby. But the eruption does not explain everything neatly. Minoan culture did not simply vanish in one cinematic volcanic burp. It changed, weakened, and was eventually overshadowed by Mycenaean Greek power. The gap is in the transition: who ruled, who resisted, what collapsed first, and how ordinary people experienced it. We can admire the frescoes, but the captions are missing. The Minoans left beauty everywhere and explanations almost nowhere. 21. Roemer's Gap is the fossil record doing that extremely annoying thing where the plot gets interesting and then several chapters go missing. Around 360 to 345 million years ago, early four-limbed vertebrates, the distant pioneers of life on land, become strangely rare in known fossils. Before the gap, fish-like creatures were experimenting with limbs and shallow-water lifestyles. After it, more clearly land-adapted amphibian-like animals appear. But the middle is thin, and that matters because this was one of the biggest evolutionary transitions ever. How did limbs improve? How did lungs, bodies, senses, and movement adapt? What environments shaped them? For years, scientists had to squint at scattered clues like detectives solving a crime with 3 muddy footprints and a suspicious bone. New fossil discoveries have helped, but the gap still reminds us that life's history is not a complete album. It is a shredded scrapbook with miracles hiding between pages. 22. The Etruscans are the mysterious, cool older cousins of Rome, and Rome borrowed from them so hard it should have paid royalties. Before Rome became the empire with a giant ego, the Etruscans dominated parts of Italy with wealthy cities, impressive tombs, religious rituals, engineering skill, metalwork, and political influence. They helped shape Roman religion, symbols of power, urban planning, drainage, gladiatorial traditions, and possibly even the alphabet Rome used. Then Rome expanded, absorbed them, and eventually the Etruscan language faded from daily life. That is the tragedy of being conquered by your most aggressive student. We can read some Etruscan words, but the language is still only partly understood, and their own histories did not survive in full. Rome wrote the victory story. The Etruscans left tomb paintings, inscriptions, and ghosts of influence everywhere. They helped build Rome's cultural skeleton, then vanished inside the body. 23. Cahokia was once a massive city near the Mississippi River, with huge earthen mounds, neighborhoods, plazas, elite spaces, trade networks, and a population that may have rivaled major European cities of its time. Its greatest mound, Monk's Mound, still looks like someone told a hill to become a pyramid, and the hill took the job seriously. Around the 11th and 12th centuries, Cahokia was a powerhouse of the Mississippian world. Then, over time, it declined and was abandoned. Why? Climate stress, flooding, political conflict, resource problems, disease, social unrest, or a combination of several disasters may have played roles. But nobody left us a mayoral resignation letter saying the city is closed due to terrible management and suspicious weather. Cahokia destroys the myth that North America lacked great urban centers before Europeans. The gap is not whether it mattered. The gap is how such a place unraveled. 24. Stonehenge is not mysterious because we have no idea how stones can be moved. Humans are stubborn, clever, and terrifyingly willing to drag heavy things for ceremonial reasons. Archaeologists have many practical ideas about how the stones were transported, shaped, raised, and aligned. The real missing manual is why people committed generations of effort to building and rebuilding this monument on Salisbury Plain. Was it a solar calendar? A ritual center? A place of healing? A cemetery? A political symbol? A sacred landscape tied to ancestors and seasonal gatherings? The answer may be several of those at once, because ancient people were not required to make things simple for future documentary writers. The builders left no readable text explaining their intention, so we can measure alignments, map burials, analyze stones, and reconstruct labor. But the central human question remains open. What belief made all that work feel necessary? 25. The Indus Valley civilization had cities with drainage systems so impressive they make some later civilizations look like they were just pouring sewage into vibes. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and other sites had planned streets, standardized weights, craft production, trade, and urban organization on a massive scale. Then comes the maddening part. Their script remains undeciphered. Thousands of short inscriptions exist on seals and objects, but we still do not know what language they recorded or even whether some signs functioned exactly like writing. That means we do not know their rulers' names, their myths, their laws, their political slogans, or what they complained about during city council meetings. Other ancient civilizations gave us kings bragging about battles. The Indus gave us cleanliness, standardization, and silence. It is one of history's greatest civilizations, and we cannot read its name tag. 26. The Bronze Age collapse is the moment when the ancient Eastern Mediterranean looked at its own highly connected world system and said, "What if everything broke at once?" Around the 12th century before Christ, major kingdoms and cities suffered destruction. Trade networks shattered, writing declined in some regions, and powers like the Hittite Empire disappeared. Egypt survived, but weakened. Mycenaean Greece collapsed. Ugarit burned. In the records, mysterious attackers called the Sea Peoples appear, which is a name so vague it sounds like an ancient police report written during a panic attack. Were they invaders, refugees, raiders, migrants, former mercenaries, or desperate victims of the same collapse? Probably some messy combination. Climate stress, earthquakes, famine, rebellion, and warfare all enter the crime scene. We have clues, burned tablets, and terrified letters. What we do not have is one clean villain. History rarely gives us that courtesy. 27. The land of Punt was ancient Egypt's luxury supplier, trading in incense, ebony, gold, exotic animals, and other goods that made pharaohs look rich enough to annoy the gods. Egyptian reliefs show expeditions to Punt, including ships, trees, houses, rulers, and cargo. They clearly knew the place. They went there, traded there, talked about it, and treated it as a real location. And yet modern scholars still debate exactly where Punt was. The Horn of Africa is a strong candidate, with areas around modern Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, or nearby regions often discussed. Parts of Arabia have also been proposed. The problem is that Egyptian texts gave directions like ancient people always do, confidently, poetically, and with no GPS pin. So Punt is not fictional. It is worse, it was real, important, repeatedly visited, and still manages to stand slightly off the map, smirking behind incense smoke. 28. The so-called missing 400 years between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are not empty in world history. Empires rose, armies marched, temples were contested, and Jewish communities changed profoundly. But in the biblical narrative, the gap between the later prophetic books and the world of the Gospels can feel like someone turned the lights off and then turned them back on in a completely different political universe. Persia gives way to Greek influence. Alexander the Great reshapes the region. Hellenistic kingdoms fight over Judea. The Maccabean revolt erupts. The Hasmoneans rise. Then Rome enters the chat. Because of course Rome enters the chat. By the time the New Testament begins, the setting is full of Pharisees, Sadducees, synagogues, Herodian politics, and Roman occupation. The gap is not that nothing happened. The gap is that so much happened without being neatly packaged in the same biblical storyline. 29. The Basque language is the linguistic equivalent of a person at a family reunion who is related to absolutely nobody and refuses to explain how they got invited. Spoken in the Basque country across parts of Spain and France, Euskara is not an Indo-European language, while almost every major language around it is. Spanish, French, Latin, Celtic languages, Germanic languages, Slavic languages. They all belong to huge family trees. Basque stands apart like an ancient stone house that survived every neighborhood renovation. Scholars have searched for relatives, but no connection has been proven. It may descend from languages spoken in Western Europe before Indo-European languages spread widely. That makes it a living fossil of human speech, but not a simple one. We do not know what its ancient relatives sounded like, how many there were, or how this one survived when others vanished. Basque is not from the sky. It is from a missing continent of language. 30. The Olmecs are often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, which sounds sweet until you realize this mother left behind colossal stone heads and then refused to explain herself. Flourishing in what is now southern Mexico, the Olmecs built major centers, carved enormous basalt heads, created complex art, influenced later religious symbols, and helped shape traditions that would echo through Maya and Aztec worlds. Then their major centers declined, shifted, or were abandoned. Why? Environmental change, river movement, agricultural stress, political instability, or internal conflict may have contributed. But the Olmecs did not leave a readable library saying, "Dear future historians, here is why things went badly." Their art is powerful, but their language and political history remain difficult to reconstruct. The colossal heads stare outward with calm authority, as if they know the whole story and are choosing not to share because apparently ancient stone faces enjoy being dramatic. 31. The Denisovans are one of the most outrageous examples of how little we actually know about the human family. Scientists identified them not from a complete skeleton, not from a dramatic cave mural, not from a proud prehistoric passport, but from tiny fragments, a finger bone, teeth, bits of skull, and DNA. That is it. From that biological breadcrumb trail, researchers discovered an entire ancient human population that interbred with the ancestors of some modern people, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania. Imagine finding a single tooth and realizing, oh, this represents a whole branch of humanity. Denisovans lived across a huge range, adapted to harsh environments, and left genetic traces that still matter today. But what did they look like in detail? What tools did they prefer? What stories did they tell? We have their DNA echo, but almost none of their world. It is a species-shaped shadow. 32. Diego de Landa gave history one of its most painful missing chapters when he helped destroy Maya books in the 16th century. As a Spanish bishop in Yucatan, he ordered the burning of Maya codices and religious objects, believing he was fighting idolatry. What he actually did was help erase libraries of astronomy, ritual, history, genealogy, mathematics, and memory from one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas. Only a tiny number of Maya books survived. The cruel irony is that Landa also recorded information about Maya writing that later helped scholars decipher parts of the script. So the man who burned the library accidentally left a damaged key under the ashes. Maya history is not gone, and archaeology, inscriptions, and living Maya traditions preserve a great deal. But the loss of those books is gigantic. One day of fanatic destruction created centuries of silence. 33. The Sumerian sudden leap looks sudden mostly because the earlier steps are buried, scattered, and harder to see. By the late 4th millennium before Christ, southern Mesopotamia had cities, temples, writing, mathematics, accounting, wheels, long-distance trade, and enough bureaucracy to make modern office workers feel spiritually attacked. It can look like civilization popped into existence fully dressed and holding a clipboard. But the Sumerians were built on earlier developments from cultures like Ubaid and Uruk, with centuries of farming, irrigation, craft specialization, trade, and social complexity behind them. The gap is not that nothing came before. The gap is that the final transformation into city life and written administration happened through processes we can only partly reconstruct. We have clay tablets once writing appears, but before that we rely on buildings, pottery, tokens, seals, and mud brick ghosts. Sumer did not fall from the sky. It climbed out of a fog bank. So that is the uncomfortable truth. History is not one giant book. It is a burned library with a few pages taped back together by exhausted archaeologists. But now, I want the real fight in the comments. Which missing chapter is the biggest insult to human curiosity, and which mystery did we criminally leave out? If you think this list missed an obvious one, prove it below. And if this video fed your inner history gremlin, hit like and subscribe.